Okay, it looks like we've achieved broadcast status, and we've just lost our first participant. Daryl will be back. He's up in Nova Scotia, experiencing some internet difficulties. Welcome, everyone. Let's go to the intro page. So, greetings from Brooklyn, New York. On a gray, gloomy day in Bay Ridge, I'm Tim Tomlinson, and this is Isolation Break number 12, a joint presentation of New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. Generally, we have Ravi Shankar, my colleague, in front of the camera. Ravi is the creator and curator of IsoBreak. He may be awake and watching, but currently he's laid up with a minor injury. We expect to have him back in front of the cameras for the fall 2021 programs, which I'll say a little bit about later into the program. I'm happy to fill in for Ravi, but also aware of the great job he's done in the past, so I'm going to try to live up to the standards that Ravi has set. Late last year, I teamed up with Ravi and Sally Breen of Griffith University, Gold Coast, Australia, and of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, and we edited this volume of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction called Meridian. And today's lineup of readers features contributors to this volume. I'm going to put it down here. And the readers are Daryl Wetter, should the internet allow him to get back in. I don't see any notes about Daryl's return. Pia Mustamaki, Thomas Marwie, Bashir Sakharwaz, and Vijay Sasadri. Everybody checking in from different parts around the globe, and we can talk about that once we get moving. I'll say a bit more about each of these writers and their careers as I introduce them, and then turn the screen over to them for their portion of the reading. For now, I just want to say that it's been such a great pleasure to revisit the work in Meridian, getting prepared for this conversation and this reading. It's been wonderful to recognize again how brilliant the contributions are. We are, I think, justifiably proud of this publication. And we're very thankful that BJ agreed to write the introduction to it, which I think characterizes the nature of the endeavor and its achievement really quite beautifully. We'll follow the readings with some Q&A. And this is where you, wherever you are, can come in and send us a question. If you have questions, I can get them in front of the panelists, and they'd love to hear from you. If you don't have a question, please just say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from. We love to know who's watching and from where. Okay, so that's our introduction for today. And Pia, you might have to pinch hit for leadoff, which is a baseball metaphor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but you were over here for 20 years, so
yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay. Okay, so let's go to Pia to start, and then we'll get Daryl in if he's able to re-enter. The weather, I think, in Nova Scotia is a little bit rough, as it was here up until about 15 minutes ago. So usually I have to go to Asia or somewhere to see Pia, but last week we had the pleasure of dinner together in Brooklyn. So wonderful to see Pia again today, checking in from Abu Dhabi. Pia is an academic wanderluster, currently located in Abu Dhabi, where she teaches at NYU, New York University's writing program. Originally from Finland, Pia lived in New York City for 2 decades and holds a PhD in literature from Rutgers University. She's traveled in about 90 countries, and her travel writing has been published in Punctuate, The Culturist, and Matador Network. Her academic writing has appeared in the Journal of Dramatic Theory and Criticism and Neobellicon. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friend, Pia Mustamaki.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the introduction. This is actually very appropriate because I am actually in isolation in Abu Dhabi. We even get this kind of a tracker, so we don't leave the house. I should get it off tomorrow. So I was thinking I'm going to read just the beginning of the essay that appears as a nonfiction essay in Meridian, and then read something new, which is was something that Tim said maybe it's a scary move, that I'm going to try that. So first I'm going to read from A Rich Life. My mother is sitting on my balcony in Abu Dhabi, taking in the sun with the vehemence of someone who has just arrived from the light-deprived north. I'm telling her and my sister about my recent trip to Johannesburg, half hiding inside from the sun. Or I'm more so telling my sister because I know my mother often has a hard time understanding the world. But I get carried away and I forget about her shortcomings. I tell them about Gary, a 60-year-old local who I met on Couchsurfing, a traveler's networking site, who picked me up in a convertible BMW from my Melville guest house. He took me to Soweto for lunch. Gary was soft-spoken, as people who have seen a lot often are. Over lunch in an unassuming restaurant called Villa Kasi, named after Soweto's main strip, he nonchalantly mentions that he had been in prison with Mandela and later worked in his government building the country's police force. Though I was about to choke on my fried liver, I took Gary's cue and I didn't ask anything. He seemed like he was done talking about the topic. After lunch, we stopped at Mandela's house nearby. Gary waited for me outside while I toured the small house with a lot of other tourists. I felt awkward visiting his prison friend's house, but Gary seemed fine with it. Outside, 2 local women asked to pose with me, and Gary volunteered to take pictures. We all smiled awkwardly. The women seemed unprivileged in all kinds of ways I am not. My sister pours us more champagne. We're in the habit of enjoying a morning bottle of champagne when we rarely get together. We figure it's a luxurious but well-earned pleasure. I told my sister and mother the short version of the story, wrapping it up with my second and chance meeting with Gary a few days later at a bar close to my guest house he'd recommended. This time I also met his son, Jay, a 22-year-old university student. It was a lovely Sunday, the bar almost empty. Gary knew the owner, who said it was empty because it was January, but probably also because there had been a fatal drive-by shooting on New Year's Eve. Gary and Jay were nodding, emotionless, used to Joburg's dangers. The late afternoon turned into evening. I sat between the father and the son, and we all had drinks. I talked to both of them, while they mostly just talked to me. A painter passed by, selling his portraits of notable Black people. Jay got a kick out of his father not knowing who Tupac was. I, on the other hand, didn't know one of the South African freedom fighters. Will I learn about him in the Apartheid Museum? No, Gary says, he's not there. What about you? No. Another clear end to a discussion. When Gary disappeared to the bathroom, I told Jay that his father has had an incredible life. I know, but he doesn't talk about it. I found out what I know from the internet. It's all there. Wow, good thing I didn't ask anything either. They're all like that, Jay continued, the whole generation. After talking about Joburg's music scene for a while, sensing the tense relationship between the father and the son, I said it was nice that Jay was hanging out having Sunday drinks with his dad. Yeah, sure, but he also disappeared from my life for long periods of time, Jay answered, with the emotional restraint of someone who's been hurt. The pain Gary and his generation seem not to want to pass on to their children has found an expression another way. Traumas are resilient like that. Jay's difficult relation with his dad mirrors my own with my mother. Remembering too much, I too have had a hard time accepting my mother's clumsy efforts at closeness. But I leave that part out of the story. It doesn't fit the sun-filled Friday morning. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully some of you will be interested in reading the rest on the Meridian. It's a short essay, there's only a half left, I think. But I wanted to read something new, even though it might be risky. And this is called She Stares at Me. It's flash nonfiction, travel essay, and ekphrasis all at once. I actually started working on it in a workshop with Ravi, so it seemed appropriate. And I just want to apologize for butchering the French in it. I really can't pronounce it for the life of me. Okay. She's on the third floor, next to a statue from Cameroon. She's young and beautiful, just a girl, really. Her expression is difficult to interpret. She stares at me. We pass a lovely chatting group of Senegalese women, all dressed in a medley of primary colors. I wish I'd understand what they're saying, what they think of the recently opened first museum of black civilization in the world. The museum is in their capital, Dakar, paid for $34 million of China aid. The elliptical building dominates the empty square in front of it. It reminds me of European state-funded museums like those in my home country of Finland, oozing authority but stifling. The shape imitates the walls of Great Zimbabwe, the Iron Age abandoned city with imposing stone structures, which gives the modern-day nation its name. When the country was called Rhodesia, named after the British miner and businessman Cecil B. Rhodes, the colonizers came up with different theories of who had built the structure. Something so sophisticated couldn't have been built by Africans, they reasoned. We wander around the massive 14,000 square meter museum. It seems there's more space than artifacts. There was no curator, the ambassador of Luxembourg says when I asked her what she thought. She had attended the opening ceremony. Yet the tall white walls draw attention to fragments of impressive history. An exhibition of the roots of humanity in East Africa, a long curved wall where you can follow its evolution. Pictures of castles of Benin, the mosques of Mali. All that history printed on foam boards, not worthy of the past they convey to us. The evidence of those old kingdoms scattered all over the civilized world. Up to 95% of Africa's cultural heritage is held outside Africa by major museums. France alone holds 90,000 sub-Saharan African objects in its museums, reports the New York Times. Luckily for Musée des Civilisations Noires, France loaned some artifacts for the opening. They're going to demand them back too. The higher we go, the more there is. It's strong and vibrant and thought-provoking, mostly contemporary art from the last Dakar Biennale and from the African diaspora. It's as if the museum wants to show the visitor the magnificent but looted past, ending with the feisty spirit that despite all hasn't been stifled. We spend most of our time on the third floor. That's where I meet her. She stares at me with a blank stare. Or is it bold, rather? Like she knows something I don't and she's not going to tell me either. The light reflects off her flawless skin, but only in hues of black and white. It's a stark contrast to the intense red of her hair. But instead of hair, she has red pliers sticking out of her head. Still, when looking at her from afar, the pliers look like Topsy's hair in Uncle Tom's Cabin, braided into little tails which stuck out in every direction. Like Crazy Eyes Suzanne's in The Orange is the New Black. The unruly girl's unruly hair is braided blood red. It's powerful, it's electric. Or is it a reminder of pain, of a past taken from her? The 2018 painting's name is Regresseur by a Cuban art collective with a merger. My French is so bad I have to check later in the dictionary what it means. Finding out helps to soothe the uneasiness the museum caused. Rectifiers. A rectifier is a device that converts alternating current into a direct current, or a hair straightener, perhaps also a revenger, a judge, or righter of wrongs. Thank you. I wanted to show you the painting. Here it is, if you can see. So back to you, Tim.
Wonderful, Pia. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the painting. Quite striking. I think you did well with the pronunciations, and I think you whet the appetites of the viewers for the fullness of your essay, which really concerns a kind of generational passage of trauma, something that I think is more and more on the minds of everyone these days. As we all go through these crazy times. Thank you so much. We'll get back to you toward the end of the program. Now, Daryl Wetter, who was supposed to lead off, going back to the baseball metaphor, tried to get in and it looks like he flickered a little bit and then has disappeared. So I want to move forward to Thomas Marwie. If Thomas, you're ready, do you feel like you're all set?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Okay. So there's a kind of running motif in the reading tonight of Columbia University. I was there in an earlier century, and so good to see really talented and brilliant people representing the new century as Thomas is. Thomas Marwie is a writer, poet, and editor based in New York City. They hold a BA in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University. And I think Thomas is a recent graduate. So congratulations, Thomas. A chapbook of Thomas's poetry, Generation Loss, was recently awarded a University and College Poetry Prize by the Academy of American Poets. They are currently at work on their first novel. Thomas, I'm going to give you the screen, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Tim, and really a pleasure to be here with all these wonderful writers today. And by the anthology, if you haven't, I'm going to be reading from my short story that's in it. I'm going to be reading a bit of the introduction, and then I'll read a few pages from something new. So this is called The Photograph. Two events threw Julia's afternoon into disarray. The first came in the form of a winter storm warning that vibrated everyone's phones in the office simultaneously. The second came via an email from a lawyer representing a friend who had passed away recently. The legal firm Julia worked for subscribed to a lot of mailing lists, so there were always hundreds of emails to sort through. She was on her lunch break, eating a kale and quinoa salad and sifting through her inbox. Initially, she had sent the email from the unfamiliar address straight to the trash, but something in the subject line, concerning HJ's last wishes, made her pause and recover it. The email was short, formal correspondence from a lawyer in Manhattan. I'm sure you're already aware of Harry's untimely passing. As one of Harry's close friends, I offer you my deepest condolences. She was aware. Even though she hadn't been invited to the funeral, it was almost impossible to avoid the news of Harry's death, all over the newspapers and plastered across her social media feeds. The entire New York art world was in mourning, it seemed. Galleries already planning their retrospectives, collectors preparing to sell his works at a markup. Although the email from the lawyer described Julia as a close friend, in reality she'd met Harry a handful of times. She was only connected to him through her late husband, Lee, a close friend of Harry's since childhood. So it was reasonable Julia wasn't invited to the funeral. She'd found out about Harry's death, like everyone else, through the announcements online. Harry Jacobs, LGBT photographer known for his provocative documentation of the AIDS crisis, dead at 60. Harry had passed away at Mount Sinai Hospital a month ago. His death was not shocking. She'd known how sick he was, but the news had nevertheless saddened her. Even though they hadn't been close, it would have been nice to have gone. She would have enjoyed attending the funeral and feeling proximity to someone like him, someone so admired and who had left such a legacy. The few times she'd met him, Harry had reminded her of what people sometimes referred to as the old New York, the grittier, more authentic New York that she had glimpsed during her occasional trips into the city as a girl. And she would have enjoyed, through her association with these strangers, these members and hangers-on of the art world, a brief closeness to her late husband. The email included an excerpt from Harry's last will and testament, and she stopped at a highlighted clause when she saw her name. Harry, who had only met her a handful of times, had left Julia a piece of his art. Julia, who hadn't even been invited to the funeral. The stipulation read, concerning the photographs currently on display in the Giordano Gallery in Buffalo, New York, I want no museum to take them. I want none to fall into the hands of Sotheby's or any other predatory auction house. I order the destruction, 1 month after my death, of all work on display, excepting one untitled photograph, black and white, measuring 36 by 48 inches, in the rear room. I bequeath this photograph in its original frame to Miss Julia Farber. It should be received by her personally, with a receipt signed by Miss Farber upon successful transfer. Barring this, I direct that this work be destroyed completely. Julia's lunch break was ending. Her office was on the 15th floor of a high-rise in the middle of downtown Buffalo, and her coworkers were all gathered around the floor-to-ceiling windows to gaze at the winter storm coalescing to the east. She watched the clouds pooling above the city. The sky was heavy and dark. They were predicting at least a foot of snow, maybe 2. It would mean an extra 30 minutes added to her commute home. She was having a hard time focusing. Watching the storm brewing around her, she kept thinking about this photograph Harry had left her. Her initial instinct was to be flattered that Harry had thought of her at all. But then she checked herself and realized it must have something to do with her husband. After all, Lee was their only connection. An hour passed. Julia glanced up from her desk. Late afternoon, a few flakes starting to fall. The office in a quiet lull. She never left work before 5 and tried not to stay past 6. After 5 years at the firm, she'd honed her evening routine. She could be home in less than an hour and a half and be in bed by 10. On a bathroom break, she called the gallery. The women on the phone explained politely but firmly that they were tearing down Harry's show, and this was absolutely the last day she could come in to pick it up. Julia hung up, returned to her desk, and closed her laptop. She grabbed her coat from the rack and walked out. If anyone asked, she'd say she was getting a coffee, but nobody stopped her. Thank you. So that's just the opening of the story that was in the anthology. And the thing I'm about to read is the beginning of a new story, which I wrote to be in conjunction with the story, the photograph. So the characters are the same, and the story is set about 20 years earlier, but from another character's, Lee's, perspective. Happiness. The night before he leaves, he sleeps with Harry one last time. It's late April, the first real spring weekend in the city. On Harry's block on Avenue A, the trees are green and newly in bloom, their blossoms already carpeting the street. Lee is up first, as usual. Harry is a heavy sleeper and usually doesn't wake until noon. It's early in the morning according to the alarm clock on the bedside table in the shape of a cartoon cat. Its paws point to indicate the time, eyes blinking every second. Back when he lived here with Harry, they'd shared this room. It's small and cramped, barely enough for a full-size mattress and a chest of drawers. Lee used to spend many mornings this way, watching the dawn pale above the housing projects next to the East River. Next to him, Harry stirs. One of his calves brushes against him, kicking in his sleep. Harry is 40, 5 years older than Lee, but he looks younger when he's sleeping. On the top of his head, his hair has begun to thin a little. At the crown, the blonde strands are growing sparse in the shape of a crop circle. More than anyone else he knows, Lee is surprised to find that Harry in particular is growing old. For some reason, he'd always imagined that old age would pass over Harry, miraculously, the way that some people carry a genetic immunity to certain diseases. In Lee's mind, the version of Harry that he always imagines is the Harry from the day they met 20 years ago. Lee looks at him now. He places his hand on his bare back, feeling it rise and fall with Harry's breath. He's supposed to see his family later, but he wants to prolong this morning a little longer. He has put off a lot of things until today, his last in the city. He's still hungover from the bender of a weekend they've had. He'd forgotten how much Harry can drink. They'd closed out the bar last night, McSweeney's, an old drag bar in the East Village where Harry is a regular. He'd built his early career photographing the local talent there, the young queens and dykes. He'd made the place into a bit of a landmark too, and it was too touristy now, but the drinks were free if you were with Harry. Last night, Harry seemed determined to get Lee drunk. "You're never here anymore," Harry said at one point. It was true. Lee hardly leaves Ithaca anymore, really ever since he met Julia. They moved in together recently, just a few weeks after they started dating. His friends were a little surprised when he told them. A few of his male friends had even warned him about women in their 30s who were motivated by their ticking biological clocks. Lee thought that he and Julia were engaged in a kind of game of chicken. Each was testing the other, seeing how far they would go. She'd suggested that he move in, one night, at their favorite bar, as a joke. His lease was up that month. It made sense. Why not, he said. There was no conversation about their future, no long-term plan. It was almost an arbitrary decision. Occasionally, Lee felt guilty about being away from the city. He was on slightly better terms with his parents these days, but they rarely called. It was Harry who called him, on Julia's landline. They just bought an answering machine, and Harry's voice would come on in the middle of the night like a phantom. Suddenly, Harry would appear in their apartment. His messages were always tactful. He never said anything inappropriate. The messages were always full of concern and care. They could generally be considered fraternal. In his previous attempts to describe his relationship with Harry to Julia, Lee referred to him as his brother, and it was true. Harry was more of a brother to him than either of his biological siblings. Occasionally, however, if he'd been drinking, Harry would leave long, rambling messages on the machine. These were sloppy, maudlin messages, tinged with something that bitterness. Harry's voice would come on, slightly garbled by the speaker, naked in its longing. Lee deleted these messages immediately, before Julia could find them. Harry's camera is lying on a stack of books next to the bed. Lee holds it up and peers through the viewfinder. The room, in the early light, is dim through the lens. He adjusts the focus, and Harry's shoulder comes into view. He zooms in on a birthmark that clings onto his left arm like a barnacle. Lee puts down the camera. The sun has fully risen. He goes into the bathroom and turns on the shower, cranking the knob to hot. Often, when they were living together, they would shower together to conserve water, Harry always joked. Even when Harry was seeing other people, they still did it. They'd have sex in the shower sometimes, but it was mostly a platonic thing. They'd wake up and stumble in together, letting the scalding water loosen up their muscles, lathering soap on each other's hard-to-reach places. This morning, Lee showers alone. He waits for the water to get hot, the old pipes taking a long time to get warm. Mist curls at the base of the tub. When he steps in, he imagines last night washing off of him, streaming into a dirty puddle at his feet. Last night, when they were having sex, Harry kept asking him, "Are you sure you want this?" He asked this even as they were in bed, limbs interlocked, biting and pulling at each other. "Yes," he said. "Are you sure?" Harry asked, sliding inside of him. "Yes," again and again, a litany, his voice coming from someplace deep in his chest, near his sternum. Afterward, Lee said they could never do it again. Harry agreed. They were lying together in bed, naked. The window was open. A gentle breeze blew off the river. It was 2 or 3 in the morning. Lee watched as the hairs on Harry's calf rose and fell in the breeze, like golden stalks of wheat in a field. Neither of them mentioned Julia. It was unnecessary. "That was the last time," Lee said again. Harry grunted. Lee wasn't sure if Harry had heard him. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me come back in. All right. Wonderful work. I'm not going to pack a case and make a visit to Buffalo, but I love the way you open up a view of that city. But even more so, the past of New York City, which is something that really charmed me in the piece from Meridian, which I'm reminded is available worldwide from the APWT website. So you can visit the APWT website and purchase a copy of Meridian. So thank you so much for sharing that and for bringing us some of the new work as well. Wow. Daryl was in and he's out again. I keep getting messages from him that he's flickering in, and then as soon as I'm ready to admit him to the stream, he's gone. That's life. I'm Tim Tomlinson. You're watching IsoBreak number 12. This is a series that's imagined and curated by Ravi Shankar. I'm filling in for Ravi today. It's a joint production of New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. We're so happy to have all of you out there. People are checking in from all over the globe. I see Greece, I see Melbourne, Australia. And then, of course, we have this international crew before you in the panel. Well, since Daryl is still struggling to get back in, that can be the suspense, the hook for this reading, and maybe we'll get him in here, but no promises. In the meantime, I want to move to Bashir. So Bashir, if you'll be ready, I'd like to introduce you.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bashir Sakharwaz is an award-winning poet and novelist. Since his first poetry collection was awarded first prize for new poetry by the Afghan Writers Association in 1978, he has published 7 books in Persian and English. His latest novel, Majir the Snake Charmer, was longlisted for the 2013 Economist Crossword Book Award. Other works have been published in Proceedings of the 9th Conference of the European Society for Central Asia, Images of Afghanistan, and Language for a New Century, co-edited by our own Ravi Shankar. and numerous other venues. Bashir is the winner of the 2015 Geneva Writers Group Literary Award for Fiction. He is currently working on a memoir about his dramatic departure and long exile from his native land of Afghanistan. We welcome Bashir Sakharwaz in these very troubled times, and I'm going to give Bashir the full screen. Welcome, Bashir.
Thank you. Thank you for introduction. Yes, it is a very hard time for the people of Afghanistan, and I'm really surprised to see the Taliban have come again. My piece is about my journey when I went to Afghanistan working for UNICEF. I wanted to participate in rebuilding my country. And there I noticed how the country was damaged by the Taliban. And I actually felt that the people were so tired of the Taliban that they will never come back. My piece is now dedicated to the women of Afghanistan that actually they have suffered quite a lot through this 40 years of wars, not only because of the Taliban, but at the beginning in the hand of the communists, and then the Mujahideen and Taliban, and it continues, and now the Taliban again. I actually mainly write about Afghanistan and also this cultural issues, and also the power of religion, which plays in a negative way on Afghan people. My piece is called Baba Ghaibi in 2002 when I was in Afghanistan. My mother was born in a ditch. Well, not exactly, but the whole village was called Jarpiruz, the victorious ditch. The ditch in question was about 4 meters wide and 3 meters deep and ran along the western side of the village. I asked my mother the reason for this name. How would I know? She replied. They named the place before my great, 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 and even greater grandfather existed. Accompanied by my cousin Khalil, I was on my way to see this village once again after more than 2 decades. When we reached the stream, Khalil took his shoes off, pulled his trousers up, and asked me to do the same. The small wooden bridge was no longer there. I edged across the stream. The water lapped at my knees, making sure I didn't slip on the weed-covered pebbles. Before entering the big wooden gate of the Qila, I stopped to pray for the souls of the dead. I stood under the poplar tree I had climbed in my childhood and raised my hands in prayers. The graveyard in front of the Qila had expanded considerably towards the cornfields, but fortunately, none of my immediate family members were sleeping there. My mother had almost died when she was a child. She told me that for some reason, she had been unable to pass water for days. Uncle Nur Muhammad carried her all the way to the shrine of Khajagar on his back because she could not walk. Such was the power of the belief in this child that she urinated there, and by doing so, she angered the shrine keeper. I am glad she did. Otherwise, my mother would have been in this graveyard next to Uncle Nur Muhammad and her other siblings, and I would have been born to Mrs. Smith in Mississippi, because I am almost sure I was about to be born somewhere. But I am happy with my Afghan mother, and I love her. I love her because she helped us all to get out of the ditch. Not all the dead were buried in the family graveyard. The bodies of 2 of my relatives were never found. One cousin was an army officer fighting the Mujahideen. He was in his compound when they attacked and killed him. His body turned to ashes as the place burned. His brother, on the other hand, was killed by the army, the enemy of the Mujahideen, as he ran home to bring his animals to safety because his house was bombed. The bomb hit the house just as he reached the front door. There were also stories of uncles and aunts who died of simple illnesses because there were no doctors or hospitals to treat them. War dismantled life in my mother's district. I had returned to my homeland after more than 20 years of absence. Although I was safe living abroad, war affected me in different ways. I continued watching the news about my country. Most of it is tragic, and most of it tragic, and heard about the sad loss of my relatives. The tragedies were magnified in my mind as I imagined the worst. Now that the war had gone and the Taliban were defeated, my relatives and I were sitting under the same old walnut tree planted by my grandfather, gazing towards the mountains that were once the home of snow leopards, but now without a trace of snow. Does war alter the climate? Cousin, as long as we have our land, we cultivate, Khalil said. But all your vines are burned by the Taliban, I said. Their roots are still there underground. But even if you start again, there's no water, I said, pointing towards the mountain. Look, there's snow on the mountain. Look, there's no snow on the mountain, and you have had no rain for a long time. There is water, but we have to buy it. Buy it? Where is it? Whom from? From Yagulaga. How did he find the water? It's a long story, cousin. Tell me. Many years ago, Mia grandfather was walking on the hill. Our country was suffering from another drought. In one place, he stamped his feet and shouted at the earth, I order you to open up and give me water. The earth opened up under his feet, and since then, enough water to run 2 mills flow day and night. Oh God, you believe in that shit? Listen, cousin, we are all followers of Islam. We believe in miracles. Is that so? But how? Our Prophet Muhammad did not perform any miracles. Was he less important than his follower? Khalid was not prepared to listen to me, and I did not force him. In the evening, we sat with the relatives on the flat roof to have dinner. The gentle breeze from the smell of sea buckthorn from the farms below. We were told never to play near the buckthorn trees because snakes like their scent and lay beneath their shade. I saw a snake only once in the Job district as I was walking with my cousin Masjidi on a foothill along a stream, a line of cypress trees casting shadows onto the path at sunset. The gray color of the day magnified the body of the snake, big and ready to attack. Masjidi quickly took his shawl from his shoulder and waved at the snake to scare it, and by doing so, the snake disappeared. In those days, the only danger were the appearance of the snake and the sharp sting of wasp on the neck. We were not bitten by the venomous snake of war. We only heard about it on the radio in the Middle East and Vietnam, countries we only knew about from our school geography books. But when the war came to our country, no one was safe, including snakes and wasps. On my way to my mother's home, I saw burned vineyards and trees, destroyed houses, demolished schools and hospitals, bridges dangling from pillars towards the rivers, half their structures washed away. I saw crippled men, armless men, blind men, all wandering around in the street. In some parts of Kabul, not a single building was standing. The best you could find were walls without roofs, and yet the spirit of the people had not been completely destroyed. Tales of underground schools for girls on the surface were sewing course made me admire the bravery of those responsible for running them. The teachers in some of those schools were males, and if the Taliban had found out men taught girls, they would have been stoned to death in Ghazi football ground. Hidden nursing schools for women also operated. Nurses helped women with childbirth and gave medicine to sick. Women were banned from going to doctors during the Taliban regime, and also were girls from having formal education. The best the Taliban offered women was to go to the shrine to pray for their sickness. The Taliban had brought darkness and superstition with them. They even created a special prayer for rain during droughts, gathering people from the street, lining them up in a square, and ordering them to pray for rain. But rain never came. Thank you. I always have difficulty reading in English, but I also read slow. Thank you. I finished.
Wonderful, Bashir. It was deeply moving, a return to the very powerful rendering of a kind of placidity of place with something simmering just underneath. And people have commented in the chat about the powerful image of the vines and the dead, but the roots are still alive underground, and how heartbreaking the piece really is. And it's amazing that history has turned a page, and now we're looking at a record that's no longer completely accurate. Something else is going on. I hope you continue to write about it. It's really quite beautiful and quite necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get, I see, oh, he was in, and now he's out. The drama continues. We have to get a screenwriter in here and make it up for cable. Let me see if this works. If I add Daryl, we're just going to get that image. Well, we can keep him there. It looks like a 45 record. There he is, Daryl. Unmute yourself, Daryl. Let's see if we can get you in now. Yeah, Daryl, you need to unmute yourself. Uh-oh. Unmute from your end. There you go.
Hi.
Hey.
So sorry. My beloved rural internet's been cutting out entirely.
It's the ghost of Sam Shepard.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so sorry about all this.
Okay. Let's see if we can get you in.
Okay.
And if you flicker back out, we'll move along and keep hoping that you manage to enter the stream.
Okay.
So welcome, Daryl Wetter. Let me go back in the documents so I can do you some justice. Okay. So Professor Daryl Wetter was the inaugural director of the first taught creative writing master's degree in Singapore and Southeast Asia, in a degree conferred by Goldsmiths University, London. He is the author of 4 books of fiction and 2 poetry collections, including the recent climate crisis novel Our Sands, published by Penguin Random House. His essays on literature and creative writing pedagogy have been published by the Brooklyn Rail, one for the hometown, Routledge, Oxford University Press, and Presses Sorbonne Nouvelle, among others. His latest book is Teaching Creative Writing in Asia, an anthology with Routledge, out any day now, and available for anyone looking to spend, wait for it, $200 on some brilliant teaching essays. I'm willing to spend it, but I need to know if that's going to cover shipping. Maybe we can talk after. Okay, well, welcome, Daryl. I hope your signal maintains. I turn the screen over to you.
Thank you so much, Tim, and everyone. And I apologize for my electronic absences. Okay, so I'm just gambling that you can see me and hear me.
We can hear you. There you are. Okay.
Like many of the readers today, I'm actually not where I normally live, and that's my excuse for not having my treasured copy of the Meridian anthology in my hand. Some of my former students, like Donna Tang, are also in that anthology, so it has a really affectionate place in my heart. So my poem that appears in Meridian, it is a truth universally acknowledged that Even those of us who are not hand talkers became, in this pandemic year of teaching on Zoom, hand teachers. And so I think this poem is going to work well online. So the poem is called The Ridiculous Travel Mimes of My Husband. That first ruinous restaurant success, the bill, air scribbled across the glazed diners, stylus fingers writing above the grease, the ossuary plates and clinking glasses. Then the failures, his full octave hands as wide as the chest of many 10-year-olds in Thailand, Bali, Malaysia, recovering Vietnam. Menu, hinged palms prying apart, upturned stigmata appetizers, an open book of non-secrets, secreting confusion. A twofer for two, the three middle fingers curled in so upthrust thumb and a rocked protruding pinky say bottle before the peace sign requests two beer, despite a frosty word as universal as jazz, taxi.
Looks like the network may have gone out again, creating more suspense. I see Daryl's image is hanging, but it's frozen, and probably he's unable to hear us. Okay. I was afraid that was going to happen. Well, maybe we can get Daryl in at the end of the program. I'm going to see if I can mute his mic and move on. Okay, that's not working 100%. Let me go back to exit solo, and there he goes. Okay. Yeah, these are difficult times in many ways. Once again, for those of you who are joining us late, this is IsoBreak number 12, co-sponsored by New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. And today we're featuring writers who have contributed to this most excellent volume, Meridian, an anthology. I want to get the full title in there and do honor to Drunken Boat, the APTWT Drunken Boat Anthology of New Writing. I see Daryl, the manager of New York Writers Workshop's programming, has put our correct website in the chat. Please consult the website for the many things that we have going on, especially coming up for fall 2021. Some people watching from Greece are promising that we're going to do a New York Writers Workshop conference in Greece, May 2022. So that's something else to check in on the website. No details yet, but we're working on them. Okay, so I'm going to move forward to our final reader, Vijay Sasadri. I think Vijay is ready. I'm going to read a little bit of a bio and then make a personal comment. Vijay Sasadri was born in Bangalore, India in 1954 and came to America at the age of 5. He grew up in Columbus, Ohio, where his father taught chemistry at Ohio State University. His poetry collections include 3 sections: Grey Wolf Press, 2013, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry; The Long Meadow, also won Grey Wolf in 2004, which won the James Laughlin Award; and Wild Kingdom from 1996. Vijay's CV contains many other remarkable achievements, publications, and awards. We're honored to have him read with us today for IsoBreak 12. And I want to thank him again for the very warm, perceptive introduction he wrote to the volume, Meridian. And on a personal note, I just want to remember that I first met Vijay, I think way back in 1980, when we were both studying in the Columbia University MFA program. Vijay was across the hall in the poetry workshops and seminars doing rigorous work. I was in the fiction track, and we met at the Marlin Bar on Broadway and 111th Street. Occasionally, Vijay would come by, but I think he was more diligent than many of us. That was the difference, I think, in those days between the poetry track and the fiction track. I hope things have changed. Anyway, so good to see you again in this format, VJ, and I turn the screen over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. And I think it must have been 1983 or 1984. I don't, because in 1980 I was still out on the West Coast.
Uh-huh.
But, we'll have to argue about dates as things get dimmer and dimmer. And but it's great to be a part of this reading, and it's great to hear this work, that's coming from all over the world and touching so many registers. And I was very happy to write the intro to the Meridian Anthology. I don't have a copy of it to show you because I am away from my house right now, and I'm not going to read long because we are getting short of time, and hopefully we'll have Daryl back. So I'm just going to read two poems. One that sort of addresses, these two poems are from my new book, That Was Now, This Is Then. And the first one kind of addresses in some sort of indirect way the grimness of this moment, especially grim for those of us like myself who know Southwest Asia and South Asia. And the poem I'm going to read is called Goya's Mired Men Fighting with Cudgels. And it's the only ekphrastic poem I've ever written. And it's based on an image that's always haunted me, one of Goya's black paintings that you can find in the Prado, of two men kind of stuck halfway in the earth, pummeling each other with cudgels, a terrifying painting. And I finally had to deal with it somehow. That image has never really left my imagination. Goya's Mired Men Fighting with Cudgels. The violence done to the mind by the weaponized word or image is bad. We can live with it, though. We can understand it, or we can try, and we can consider ourselves lucky, which we are. Nothing can be understood about the blunt force trauma to the head, the percussion grenade, the helmet-to-helmet hit at an aggregate speed of 40 miles an hour. No concussion protocol comprehends the self's delicate apparatus crumpled in the wide pan of the brain, the roof collapsing in Aleppo, the beam slamming the frontal lobe, the drone, the terror by night and day. He wanted to remember it all, to fix the image cradled inside the image of itself, down the facing mirrors of future and past. And then he wanted to be left to die there, in the ditch where he was cudgeled, down and under, groundwater seeping into his mouth, himself becoming groundwater. But he felt a hand reach down and grab him by the collar and yank him back up and set him on his feet. And as he steadied himself, he thought, this compassion he feels for me as his mirror enemy, image, brother in wrath, and that I feel for him. This compassion is the compassion that those who see themselves in agony feel. But there is the other compassion, the one felt by those who see agony in themselves, which the deaf master will feel when he imagines us poised and ready to recapitulate our thinking's frozen violence. The great deaf master, living in the villa of the deaf, where he will paint us in silent pastels. And Then I'm going to read one more, since our time is getting short. And it's the last poem in my new book. And it's called To the Reader. And those of you who are here can substitute listener for reader. And it sort of addresses the global condition we find ourselves in at this moment, communicating to one another by overcoming the barriers of space. To the reader. I'm writing this so I can tell you that what you're thinking about me is exactly what I'm thinking about you. What you're reading is exactly what you're writing, by the light of a taper, deep inside yourself, at your walnut secretary. These words are saying what those words say, and these and those are those and these, mine and yours, and have no meaning, only form. Talk about being one with others. We correspond one to one, and there is a grandeur in this. You'll understand that someday. Just now, though, you're stupefied at this spooky action at a distance. So would I be, and I am. Thank you. So, back to you, Tim.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful work, VJ. I'm hoping that the book appears soon.
No, it's already out.
It's already out.
Yeah, and it came out last September.
Aha. So that's available, I assume, at bookshop.org and amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So anyone else with work that's ready to purchase, including the $200 volume of pedagogy from Asia, please post a link if you have it, and we'll spread it around. But those were very powerful poems, VJ. Thank you so much. I'm still kind of moving around in them with associations, and I want to talk about that when we finish up. I do see that Daryl has flickered back on,
All right.
and we may have another crack at this. Daryl, do you want to give it one more go?
I don't know how far I lasted last time. I don't know if my opening joke about teaching with our hands on Zoom, did that come through?
And you got through maybe I don't know how long the poem is, but you got through I would say 2 minutes of it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, then I'm just going to have to take it from the top. And so I do apologize for this repetition. So here we go. The ridiculous travel mimes of my husband. That first ruinous restaurant success, the bill air scribbled across the glazed diners, stylus fingers writing above the grease, the ossuary plates and clinking glasses. Then the failures, his full octave hands as wide as the chest of many 10-year-olds in Thailand, Bali, Malaysia, recovering Vietnam. Menu, hinged palms prying apart, upturned stigmata appetizers, an open book of non-secrets, secreting confusion. A twofer for two, the three middle fingers curled in, so upthrust thumb and a rocked protruding pinky say bottle before the peace sign requests two beer, despite a frosty word as universal as jazz, taxi, sex. Never the lout snapped fingers that divorce summons, nor the mason's sly shake. Far from the truly digital telecommunication of stadium pitcher and catcher reading their jacked man. How could he? Wife, twirling or tapping a Western wedding ring, then, please no, a trickling waterfall of all 10 fingers past upturned cheeks, tilting his head about his who is this chin? Hotel lobbies, courtyards, hallways, all that mopped, half-public air unlocked with the same cranked, pinched, ignition-tripping key? We just ate an incomprehensible hipster dice throw, a Nike swoosh on the sidewalk, out from his stomach, then back at some penultimate maitre d', a conjuring to dissolve the sidewalk litany, kebab, seafood, barbecue, pizza, pasta, curry. Numerous garbled versions of later, an at-whirl as big as a bike tire, cranked right, the slight, self-primed uptick and out. Me go bust tomorrow, a barrel leap of arm and vertical chopping palm. Even more complex, earlier, a ribbon-wristed shunt out, then concave back in. Not even I know that shuttling wrist has traveled through 20 years of lecture halls, prolepsis out to the right and analepsis tucked back sinister. After a day out to temple or beach, the temple of the beach, he even drops language with me, hand translating our couple's deep code in jouncing cab, open-sided tuk-tuk, or impatient elevator, a hefting grapefruit palm with drawstring fingers, water balloon, full bladder, me first. Two horizontally V'd fingers munch their double cut, air scissors silently announcing vasectomy. The world needs more. Too bad that guy didn't. I'm so glad I. And only for me, I gamble, I pray, I insist. Tented knuckles reared back towards his tan biceps for the adder's determined, repeated dart. All fingers springing out straight then back, once in a game. Another more private question in the lit eyes and Jack Nicholson eyebrow at hotel or rooftop bar, there on the roasting beach and sent with a grin, maybe some crumbling panko sand, always from his working hand. And remember, it's not smut, it's an homage to Shakespeare. So that is my poem that is in the Meridian Anthology. I'm not at my home where I have my copy of the anthology, so I couldn't read it on paper, but that's my poem in the anthology. How are we doing on time, Tim?
I think if you want to take 2 more minutes, you have it.
Okay, I'll just read 2 minutes. So very briefly from my 2020, or in North America, 2021 climate crisis novel, Our Sands. It's set in the Alberta tar sands, which are one of the least sustainable projects on the planet. It's this really unique Canadian thing my country is doing. And so there's a family, a 17-year-old teenage girl. She becomes an eco soldier, an eco saboteur. And her dad is a rich oil scientist. He's a former geologist turned oil scientist. So he's kind of the villain, but when it comes to climate crisis, we're all kind of the villain. And so his name is Blake. His daughter's name is Ocean, and I'll just do this quickly. To Blake, the louder someone cries social justice in public, the more of a shit they are when no one is looking. The sticky-fingered public defense attorney, tax-evading lefties, communists who really just want someone else to do the heavy lifting. Calgary is a brain trust with skyscrapers. Given its itinerant expat population with 3 or 4 university degrees, and University of Calgary's med school minting new physicians every year, most of Calgary's professional couples have heard that the international nickname for Doctors Without Borders is Doctors Without Pants. Whenever Blake hears "put an end to oppression," his translation is "put an end to me not being in charge." He never bristled at or even disputed the description of Calgary as Houston North, or even more locally, their Mount Royal neighborhood as American Hill. If anything, the nicknames were too small, too naive. Houston North still implied an autonomous city, albeit one of incredible global power. How to properly convey that much of the province was actually owned by Houston. Calgary was far more than some Houston suburb or branch plant. By 14, daughter Ocean claimed even her name was more of his greenwashing. If you had a third, would you have named it Lodgepole Pine, one for every enemy? As if the Alberta energy sector was killing the oceans more than the fertilizer on her precious tofu. She was dying to visit Bangladesh and oil. Should she go, she'd consume 3 large bottles of water a day minimum. The Gulf of Mexico
It looks like the internet has come back for an extra round and maybe knocked Daryl out in the 12th. That's a boxing metaphor, Pia. Okay, really, really sorry to lose Daryl in the midst of that. Hopefully he can come back in and join us for the conversation. This is a chance for the audience everywhere to write in and send us a question or a comment. We can put it in front of the group. Just a reminder that the readers are contributors to this volume, Meridian, published by the APTWT Drunken Boat, an anthology of new writing. And I'm Tim Tomlinson. This is a joint sponsored event with New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. If we can just circle back to where Vijay left us, the ekphrastic, the Goya men fighting with cudgels, such a striking image. And I know Thomas's story that looks like it's opening up novelistically is sprung from a photograph that's passed from the artist to a former partner. And also on Thomas's wall, I noticed images of Edward Hopper and Pierre Bonnard, both of which are kind of striking and resonant and probably great prompts for fiction. Bashir's imagery, so rich. And people commented on the snake under the tree and the snakes in the shadow. Pia, I'm thinking of in your piece, the mother outside in the sun, probably without sunscreen, while you're hiding from the sun. I wonder if you guys can talk about the generation of poems, inspiration from the image. How important is the image in your work? And maybe we can start. Well, anybody can start us off. Thomas, please.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm a visual learner, so I have visual memory, and yeah, that's always just sort of the way I start pieces. You know, it's usually with an image, not even necessarily a character or a situation or even a setting. It's like with this story, for example, with the photograph that's in the anthology, I just had this image of the photograph that's actually in the piece, and yeah, it's always just been a very generative source of writing. I love going to museums and just like looking at a painting and you know, letting that sort of guide something.
There's a wonderful moment in Ben Lerner's novel Leaving the Atocha Station where the protagonist is standing in front of a painting in the Prado, and he notices that the painting that he usually looks at to study, somebody else is in front of, and the other viewer breaks down into sobs. And the protagonist observes that he's never had that strong of a response to art, and he wishes that he could feel into art as deeply as that viewer. So I'm really interested in that as a kind of springboard for work. Pia, how about with your work?
Yeah, I was. That's a great question. I was thinking about the. So I write nonfiction, so images are something like, you know, it's kind of moments that stick with you in certain situations that I do try to bring in. I like your thing about my mom on my balcony. It's a very striking image. And then the other one, the other piece with the painting that I was talking about, it was just incredible that that painting kept haunting me. Like really, it was something that wouldn't leave me like for weeks. I'm lucky that I took a picture of it, so later I returned to it, just thinking about that. But just exactly what Tim were talking about, sometimes a painting or an image can have such a strong effect. I love that.
Right, and I'm assuming, Bashir, that may be the case for you as well, that certain imagery lingers, and then at a certain point you're moved to address it somehow?
Well, it's amazing. I really love London, England. It's a very peaceful country. but to be honest, my images of my country is always very strong. That the childhood, especially this place that my mother comes from, it's a very beautiful place, and the way that people believe in God in a very innocent way, and before the Taliban or the Mujahideen, people were very innocent. Actually, we were swimming naked, and we boys and girls, and we didn't notice that. And the woman went to the field working there. There was no burqa, no covering, and all those things. These images, they are so strong, and each of this image I could actually take and write a novel about it. So yeah, and the smell, and the all those things, the touch of those moments always with me. Yeah, it's
interesting and understandable. The enduring imagery of childhood. I think Joyce was asked if he ever thinks about Dublin, and he said, "I never left." And that's the material that he drew from throughout his career. And Vijay, I know the image itself seems to have sprung the need to write about it. And you use the Goya as a springboard into some contemporary concerns. I'm also struck by To the Reader, which kind of created certain associations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the title of the first poem of Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil? And then in the diction, I heard echoes of Adrian Rich dedications, and really quite a beautiful connectivity. Can you talk about the poems?
Yeah, I don't know about the Adrian Rich, but certainly if you write a poem called To the Reader, you're going to have to sort of, acknowledge that people are going to hear Baudelaire. And Baudelaire appears again in the word correspondences. We correspond one-to-one, you and I. And so, yeah, that impulse to actually talk to the reader, to break the fourth wall, I think is something that, we all have as writers in some way. And we kind of, that notion of our actually being aware that we are writing, even though we're trying to create the illusion of reality, in fact, what we're doing is writing. And so the ways in which one can incorporate that reflexivity into the poem and into the work of art is really kind of pretty interesting, There's that great Velázquez painting in the Prado, Las Meninas, where there's an image of Velázquez painting the painting in the mirror, opposite on the wall behind the subject of the painting, the royal family. And it's nice to play around with that kind of stuff.
It's kind of it creates an instantaneous intimacy. I really felt your presence in this room as you read the poem To the Reader in particular. But I notice in the chat that a number of people are asking questions about the Goya. You've inspired a reader from an audience member from Oklahoma to go out and do an ekphrastic. And we have a question for Vijay about the Goya painting. Was it powerful enough for you to start writing the poem in your head as you looked at it? Followed by the comment, I've always been fascinated with how ekphrastics come about after looking at an image and a painting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a consumer of visual art, and it really gives me a lot of satisfaction. I've never really, except for that image, felt I had to respond with writing of my own, unless it was critical writing, and I don't know if how many people in the audience or among the readers know that room in the Prado where the Goya black paintings are. And if you don't know the story of those paintings, he had gone deaf, and he was living in a house that had previously been called the Villa of the Deaf in a suburb of Madrid. And he hadn't just gone deaf, he had tinnitus. So he was just hearing,
Right.
stuff in his head all the time. So he was in excruciating kind of agony with that. And he painted those paintings, and they're just terrifying paintings. And, they have to be put in their own room, of course, because no other paintings, and there are many, many Goyas in the Prado, can abide to be with them. They have to be quarantined. And, and for some reason, the other ones never, the other ones, as terrifying as they are, never provoked anything in me. But that one, because it's so unbearably human, it's so concentrated in an understanding of humanity, which Goya really had. The Disasters of War series are such significant sort of uses of material visual art, and so I have never really gotten away from that image. I think I first saw it when I was in my 20s, and the painting, and it's just always stuck with me. But I don't know if it's the image that prompted it, but something about Goya, something about his condition at that moment. So the poem really ends to me with, like, the artist and what the artist does, being the witness of violence, and and what the condition is and the circumstances are. And, I don't know. I don't think I answered the question, but sort of.
I know. I think you did. You gave us plenty to think about and plenty of background as people are commenting. All fascinating. My first association to the image, as you describe it, is to Beckett, and the actor in one of the plays being in a garbage can the whole time. I think you only see his head and perhaps a derby on it. Pia would know. But all sorts of very strong positive comments coming in about the background that you provided. Somebody asked a question about the pieces of Thomas and Pia. Will those be novels? They do appear in the Meridian anthology as one-offs, but people are wondering, are they going to grow into larger pieces? And Thomas, do you want to respond to that? And then Pia?
Yeah, sure. So the story of the photograph is completely in Meridian anthology, but I've actually revised it pretty extensively since then, and I'm hoping to put together a little short story collection one day in the near future. So that, and then I'm imagining this new companion piece that I read would also be included. So I'm sort of envisioning a series of linked stories, sort of featuring the same characters who recur again. So yeah, hopefully one day.
Good. Keep at it. I love seeing characters and situations from different angles, and it feels like you're creating a really interesting constellation. And Pia?
Yeah, so the piece about the painting and the museum in Dakar, it's still finding a place. It's not published, but I'd like to have it published somewhere. But I am thinking of kind of a collection of travel essays about cities, especially in non-Western countries. So it might be part of that. It's about Dakar, even though it's really about just the museum there. So that might be where it appears.
I hope that happens. I admired the piece in the Meridian volume, and I'd love to see more of your perception of travel. I keep seeing Daryl flicker in, and I'm just about to let him enter the stream, and he flickers out. But he does have a response to my first question in the chat, saying that, yes, I often begin writing visually from a tableau of either memory or daydreaming, and equally motivated by sound. So thank you for that, Daryl. I hope you can get back in. Let's see if there are any new. Okay, here's something. Travel essays, great idea. Well, the Goya Goya, I think, in a sense, is responding to one of the questions I wanted to put to you guys, and that is that a couple of IsoBreaks back, we had the poet and essayist Jaswinder Bolina on the panel. And recently, his one of his essays called Color Coded was selected as a notable for Best American Essays 2021. So congratulations, Jaswinder. And Color Coded gets around to discussing the issue of handling politics directly in one's writing, fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. And it seems in these highly charged political times, this is an issue confronting all writers in one way or another. And I wonder how you are feeling about that. Is this an urgency that's calling to you in your work? How do you navigate the current tensions? Are you able to exclude them and do other things, or do they just automatically become a part of your vision on the page? Bashir, do you want to start? You need to unmute.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
The urgency of the political moment, is this something that intrudes upon the work that you're doing or informs the work that you're doing? Must you address it?
Yeah, always. Sorry, now I understand. Always. Actually, most of my writing evolves around the political situation in Afghanistan. Like my first book in English, Margie, the Snake Charmer, is basically describing the whole nation. Like one brother is a mujahid and the other brother is a communist. And the reason for that is because the communists invaded, the Russians invaded Afghanistan. So that political situation brought that book into existence. And the social fabric of Afghanistan also changes when these political changes come to our country. And even in this essay that I just read, even the climate changes and the people change. And for me, it's a phenomenon. It's shocking that now we have ISIS, we have the Taliban, and all these. And before, we never had this kind of situation. It's all because of the political changes, and I don't know what is going to happen next. Yeah, the political changes are the sources of my writing.
Very interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you construct next out of the current circumstances. How about you, Pia?
So since I'm also an academic and I study and teach these things, it's kind of impossible for me not to notice the political. And sometimes I try to keep it a little bit out of my work, but often it cannot be. Especially because my favorite place to travel is Africa, and both of my pieces are about that. I just think it's the whole just ignorance of the effects of the colonial past. The Europeans have no idea. And so I think it often comes back to that particular issue, back to my work that I really feel like I should be talking about, especially with all the events in the U.S. in the recent past, also on the Black Lives Matter and so forth. So definitely, it really informs how I see the world for sure.
Europeans have no idea, but what about Americans?
Yeah, even less. I don't even go there. Yeah.
There we're into the negatives, right? How about Thomas?
Yeah, I think I've been mostly a fiction writer so far, and so I think politics and fiction are an interesting mix usually. And I think for me, it usually comes out in like personal relationships more than like explicitly writing like uh, about political issues. So like definitely, I do see the personal as political, especially in writing, where it's like these sort of interpersonal dynamics can really reveal a lot about, I think, sort of current day politics and issues. But I am interested in writing more nonfiction and more from like sort of a personal essay standpoint and engaging in politics more in that way, a little bit more directly. So.
Yeah, maybe in the way of say someone like Sally Rooney, whose politics emerged through scene and dramatic action rather than direct discourse. Looking forward to seeing your upcoming work. And VJ, any ideas about the intersection of the current moment and your fixations in your work?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I was a part of a political generation, the Vietnam generation, and, a part of the counterculture. So the idea of politics has always been entangled with the idea of literature in my mind. But, for me, knowledge is required. And the thing that recently I've been, what political engagements I have had have really had to do with South Asia. I'm writing about Bangladesh now, and Bangladesh is very interesting, in terms of like what Bashir has told us today. Bangladesh is at sort of the opposite end of that arc, that Islamic arc from Afghanistan, and people overlook it. But what's fascinating to me about Bangladesh, for example, this is just one fact I'll throw out. Like a few years ago, Bangladesh matriculated more girls into the university system than boys for the first time in its history. And so I look for those kind of facts, and I do that kind of research now when I think about politics. I mean, I can't generalize about politics. I just have to have specifics, I mean, human violence is everywhere, right? I mean, under every circumstances. And, one's contemplation of violence is a little different than one's contemplation of politics. That there's almost a metaphysical element to violence, but politics really is historical. And you can see the arc of history from the American invasion in 9/11, after 9/11 to now in Afghanistan. And you can see the arc of history from the Bangladeshi War of Independence in 1971 when they broke away from Pakistan. And, all the terrible violence associated with that, to this kind of moment that Bangladesh has arrived at 50 years or from then, and to try to kind of puzzle out the reality of that, I think is very, very important, because we are entering into an intense time, especially with global warming, especially with a place like Bangladesh, right? Which is the largest river delta in the world with all of this population, many, many, many tens of millions of whom live, not more than 3 or 4 meters above sea level. So those kind of problems and the attempt to solve those problems, I think, is something that everybody should be thinking about, and certainly writers. But you also have to be very informed, because things are so complex. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And you're reminding me of this might be a good time to try to help Daryl re-enter the stream on the climate change note, since Daryl wrote a climate crisis novel. Daryl, did you hear my question, and do you have any observations? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone, that I'm in internet ghost here. But Vijay and Bashir, it's one of those serendipitous connections. So my novel Arsans, all these people thinking about the next mass extinction. The novel, one of its tiny points is what it calls the Bangladeshi hypothetical. If you're the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, how can you not detonate a nuclear missile like in the stratosphere to create particulate to try to prevent your people from roasting and drowning in floods? And of course, and my novel has these sort of layered genocides. So on the one hand, domestically in Canada, this crazy oil industry we have, it is a perpetuation of Canada's genocide of our Indigenous people. In that literally, it's this really water-intensive process. The Athabasca River happens by geographic fluke. Geography is destiny. It happens to flow north. And in Canada, north means native. So in every Canadian province, the population thins as you go north, but the population proportion switches to be predominantly Indigenous. And so literally the people, the Indigenous people in Fort Chipewyan, which are upriver, which are north of these industrial upgraders in Fort McMurray, they have bile duct cancer, which is off the charts, disproportionately high. So we're literally poisoning the First Nations. But globally, it's this latent genocide against the globally poor and coastal, because of countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan that are going to be so vulnerable to flooding, and all the ASEAN countries, where I recently lived. And yet, though, to get back to Pia's point, so we all have those motivations, and yet, though, how do you still tell a story? How do you be entertaining? And so that, I think, is one of the, and even this comes back to your first question, Tim, about incentives to write and what prompts you to write. And so, we might, on the one hand, I think social and political rage or disappointment, they are great prompters of creativity, and yet it's a really delicate balancing act, especially when writing, say, fiction or poetry. How do we turn those personal challenges, our public awareness, how do we turn them into things that are, that please the reader? That's very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Daryl. I'm so glad you got back on. So we're at that point of a final word from each of our panelists, and I want to continue Ravi's tradition of asking the panelists if they have any final word, not necessarily advice, but something to leave the viewer with, maybe something hopeful, maybe something not. I see that Ravi has added into the chat a quote from William S. Burroughs, that great optimist. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. I think that's probably true today more than any time. If you're at all informed, things are scary. But you can say something about how you're getting on, or what one might do to get on, or simply just tell us a final word about what you're most interested in right now in terms of your reading or your work. And maybe we'll start with you, Daryl, just in case anything happens in Nova Scotia.
Wisely done, Tim. The poet Muriel Rukeyser has the line, "Love must imagine the world." And that's great, but it's always easier to write the second draft. And I think in ways the imagination loves the world. So that'll be my closing note.
Beautiful. I love it. Love must imagine the world. And why don't you put in the chat your update?
Okay.
Pia.
Yeah, thank you for everybody for this, and thank you, Ravi, for the great Burroughs quote. I love that. I would like just to, I don't know, Tim, you were asking, what are we thinking about or what's going on? So what I love is that recently, or maybe 6 months ago, I completely fell into reading and consuming everything I can find about Martha Gellhorn. And that kind of obsession when you find somebody and you suddenly start thinking about their life and all of this, I think that's an awesome thing when that happens. You encounter somebody you didn't read before, and then you get completely consumed. So I wish that for everybody, that you find somebody like that in these times that we might be in isolation.
Okay, thank you very much, Pia. Thomas.
Yeah, I guess maybe as the youngest person on this panel today, I've just been thinking a lot recently, just graduating and being sort of in this sort of post-grad transition phase, just thinking about, like wanting to be around other people, other young writers and artists of my generation, and just like how vital that is for as my own development as an artist and a writer, but also just like politically and just like being around like-minded people who are trying to articulate what it's like being being a young adult in this world and having this immense burden of all the compounding crises and wanting to make some sort of art about it and feeling like it's futile but also necessary at the same time.
I think that's a great observation, and I think it's even more critical for people our age or my age. I don't want to put everybody up in the upper centuries, but yeah, we need young people to vitalize our organizations and to turn the organizations over to them. So please, Thomas, remain engaged with us, APWT and New York Writers Workshop, and bring in your crew. Let's get those like-minded people to inform the next steps, whatever they are. VJ?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any words of wisdom or, certainly no prophecies. But I kind of feel like this is a moment when I feel very strongly nothing is figured out. That like the problems, as terrible as they are also incredibly unprecedented. And so the act of the imagination has to strive to somehow find the forms by which these, this new reality can be addressed. And I think it's, expanding in this terrible way. And, I especially think more and more, I don't really think about America because America is going to be fine, but I do think about the global South. That is just the kind of, all you have to do is think about like who's been vaccinated to understand the nature of the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been vaccinated. And and there's an indication that should point us in certain directions as writers.
Yeah, I so connect with and agree with your observation that these are unprecedented problems in many respects. And I'm going to take hope from your hope that at least America will come out of this okay. I have my doubts, and it's good to hear from informed people that maybe we will. And Bashir?
Well, I really like what VJ said, and the impact of a big country, how it changes the world. Our suffering is actually, I'm sorry to say, it's directly as a result of American action. But what I want to say, positive. I actually, during this lockdown, I discovered a new life, like being in Writers Group, through online, and we met through Zoom and all these things. And I realized that we are different, that we need interaction with each other. We need to read each other's work. And also I admire the work of Ravi and you, Tim, that and also Sally and Vijay as well, that you are trying always to create an anthology, bringing writers together. Like you also have New York Writers Group or New York Workshop, and I admire that, and it's a wonderful thing to do. So let's do another one.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree, and thank you so much. And that was going to be my final observation, to remind everyone that in these difficult times, organizations like New York Writers Workshop, which is a not-for-profit, and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, we need help, and we need your contributions. not just your writing, but if you know of anyone who is acclimated to the donate button, we have a big fat donate button on the front of our on the homepage of our website. We exist on the donations of those around the world, and we're kind of getting by on those. So we thank everyone for checking in. When I hit end broadcast, that'll be the end of our live stream, but we will have video records of this event on our YouTube channel, on APWT's website, and probably all the Facebook sites that it went to. So you'll be able to revisit at any point. And once again, there's, great, Ravi and Daryl have put up our current website address, so you can take a visit there. Thank you all so much. That was phenomenal work, great conversation. I continue to admire the work you sent us, and thank you so much for your contributions today. And with that, I'm going to sign off.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Well,
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.